I had no idea what I wanted to do after high school. I went into the Air Force to find something to do. I had essentially quit high school on the second day of my second year.
Welcome to Mindset Mastery with Julissa Edwards, the podcast dedicated to helping high performers unlock their true potential and cultivate a powerful mindset for success. I'm your host, Julissa Edwards, a mindset coach and advocate for healthy high performance. Join me on this transformative journey as we delve into strategies, insights, and inspiring conversations with experts and thriving high performers. Get ready to master your mindset, elevate your performance, and create a life of purpose and fulfillment. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome back to Mindset Mastery with Julissa Edwards. Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Don St. John. He is a semi retired psychotherapist and continuum teacher of consciousness through movement. He has been engaging in the healing journey for almost 60 years. This wonderful man is 81 years old, I believe, and he began his journey into psychotherapy in his mid 20s, I believe. So, yeah, 60 years of insight, data collected, knowledge. I think something in today's day and age that we tend to overlook is all of these newbies, young people. I'm in my 30s, I'm very young. All of my colleagues, it doesn't take away that we are great at what we do. um but nothing will ever beat time, the amount of time that it allows for mastery in a certain area. I always explain, like when I got my master's, I had to master the field of mental health. I In the school that I went to, they didn't allow anything below a B for grades. There was no C's in receiving my master's. You had to be great at what you did, or learning the concepts at an elite higher level to be able to master it, correct? And then also, while getting my licensure, certain amount of hours, certain amount of time that has to be accrued. I've been in the field now for 10 years. And while that is fantastic, I still consider myself a newbie. I'm still there's so many new things to learn. And so talking to Dr. Don St. John was a pleasure to poke his brain, see what he thought about certain things, and see what he's done with his time here on Earth. So without further ado, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you all very soon. Don, can you give us a little bit of an insight as to why you chose this field and what has made you stay in it for so long?
Well, Jalissa, I think the field chose me. Uh, I had no idea what I wanted to do after high school. I went into the Air Force to find something to do. I had essentially quit high school on the second day of my second year, intellectually and emotionally. I I wasn't allowed to not go, but I left my intellect and my emotional life at home and just dragged my body through 3 more years. 2 days after I left for the Air Force, I started drinking a little too much and realized I needed help. So I found a psychiatrist who worked on Saturdays, my day off,
Okay.
and that began a journey that's now, approximately 60 years old.
Wow.
I'm 81 and, started when I was about 20. So I've been personally researching and practicing all these years.
That's beautiful. Wow. So we got like 60 years of data and discovery and passion into this field. And so, from what I'm understanding, it began because we had a drinking problem early on when you were serving and you went to go see a psychiatrist, correct?
Correct. And, it was more than a drinking problem. I was rather lost. I didn't know what I was going to do with myself. I was emotionally labile. I tended to get into fights.
Mm,
Yeah, I was just, a lost soul out there without a compass.
yeah. And
And
so, go ahead.
well, putting one foot in front of the other, I realized that, the help that I needed wasn't simply psychological. It was somatic, it was spiritual, it was relational, it was the whole nine yards. And I think, psychology being split off from the body is one of the great errors that has become institutionalized to the detriment of people who need healing.
Yeah.
And my point of view, Jalissa, is that just about all of us need healing in the sense of maximizing our potential, becoming whole. I can tell you a little story that will illustrate what I mean by most of us needing healing. It goes like this. Once upon a time, it's a little bedtime story. Once upon a time, there was a pride of lions, and they were out roaming in the jungle, and a big storm came along, and a baby lion, barely newborn, was separated from the pride and lost.
Mm,
The next day, that little lion cub was found by a herd of goats, and the goats took him in and raised him, and he learned to walk like a goat, think like a goat, bleat like a goat, and essentially thought he was a goat.
mm,
And one day, a big male lion came along and saw what was happening and took that little lion, young lion, by the scruff of the neck, took him to the river where that young lion recognized he wasn't a goat.
mm.
And that's, that self awareness.
I
When we
love that.
realize how much more we are, how much more we can be than what we think as we enter adulthood.
Right. And what we have been taught to be. I love that story, that bedtime story. I think it's beautiful because it really gives us a good understanding that you grow up in life and our teachers, our parents, society, culture, it molds us. And that's not a bad thing. It's just the way that we grow up. And then you have this moment of inner reflection where you get to look at yourself in the mirror and really find out who we really are and who we're meant to be. And you know this in a healing journey, you can have that in conjunction with all that you've been molded to be, or you can break away if it's not something that you are happy with or feel that is in alignment to who you truly are.
Yeah, exactly. And I like what you said about it's not a bad thing. It's simply how it is. We're all, to one degree or another, molded within our culture.
Yeah.
And the challenge is that our comprehension of what it means to be human is evolving.
Hmm.
Okay?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
for example, we know as psychotherapists how important it is that people be able to identify what they're feeling and be able to express what they're feeling appropriately, sure, but to identify and express. Okay, how many children are actually taught that in a consistent way over time? Okay? we
Mhm.
I wasn't, and most of the people that I know and people that I've worked with weren't. Mostly we're taught how we should be,
Yeah,
how we should feel,
absolutely.
what we should do.
Yes, my husband and I were literally just talking about that this morning. We have two little ones. I have a 3-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and
Mm.
yeah, super tiny,
Sweet.
super sweet, very tiring.
That's
But we were
why you do it
saying,
when you're young, Julissa.
oh yeah, absolutely. I completely understand why. But we were reflecting because as they were having breakfast this morning and I was getting ready for work and my husband was getting ready for the day. He has this week off and he's with the kids. So I mentioned this because our children are so beautifully different than how my husband and I grew up. We have Caribbean backgrounds, and so in a Caribbean household, it's very strict. And there's not a lot of room for child expression, feeling safe enough to do that. And so our children, Marcus and Maya, are really, in the sweetest way possible, they're very demanding and they speak their needs and their wants and they express themselves fully. And so my husband and I were chuckling because we looked at them and we said, "Oh my God, we would have never acted this way at the breakfast table," you know? And in that same sentence, my husband said, "Yeah, well, it's because we probably didn't feel safe enough to do that." To be fully expressing of our emotions, ideas, feelings, all of the things, and our children are. So it's a new learning curve for parents like myself this day and age because parenting looks so different than what it did years ago. And I think that's kind of what you were alluding to, correct?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. What fortunate children.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so I love this conversation. Okay, so I want to get to learn more about you, and I have an end goal here of where I want to take the convo. So, okay, so you had a love for this, field through your own exploration. You had some troubles with alcohol, but as we know, it was something much deeper than alcohol. You were lost, kind of in a phase of life where you needed direction, and that was your intro into the field. I wonder, Don, what was your biggest lesson in that time about yourself, biggest awakening about yourself in that time that you were with the psychiatrist while serving?
Well, I think it's important to preface my response to your question by sharing that, the first 15, 16 years of my life were highly traumatic. I would be considered a battered child in many ways. There was, physical abuse and emotional abuse that was pretty over the top. So, if you're assessing my personality at that time, it's fragmented, frozen, not capable of genuine connection, not capable of speaking sincerely from my heart without an overlay of imagery. Uh, so, in other words, pretty serious. And once I began to realize how bad, how badly I was battered, uh, I felt this deep sense of deficiency and almost hopelessness. Like how does one ever recover from there? And one of the biggest insights I had along the way went like this. Oh my God, it almost doesn't matter how normal, so-called normal, one's childhood was, they still have issues to deal with, and
Absolutely.
sometimes big issues. And, all of a sudden I start feeling like, okay, maybe mine are more challenging, but, I'm not all that different from everyone else who's in a healing process, on a healing journey.
Yeah. I
And go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm wondering, which is beautiful to see. You were so young when you were receiving your first treatment, it sounds like, introspection into like your life, and you were already able to think outside of just being the client and having recognition that all people have troubles that they have to overcome. How did you usually when someone is so battered, there's a lot of work that has to be done on regulating, healing, understanding. And so for you to be able to also have outside context that even though I had a troubling childhood, everybody kind of deals with these kinds of things. Was that part of your psychiatrist's influence on you that they were able to teach you that also while healing in that beginning stage of healing, if that's making sense?
I think the biggest value I received looking back on my initial work with my psychiatrist, I came to realize that he wasn't a very good therapist at all.
I was gonna ask you about that, especially that time. And
Yep.
even, yes, because psychiatrists are really here to prescribe medicine, and they don't usually do a great job at the counseling portion because it's not really what they went to school for. Yes.
Yeah, this guy was a Freudian.
Okay.
He went to both Harvard and John Hopkins.
Okay.
So, he had quite the intellect and he had a huge following in
Okay.
Tampa, Florida.
Okay.
But he said one thing to me. I had taken some psychology courses while I was still in the Air Force, and I thought, I'd get a bachelor's in psychology. And I said to him, "What do what could I do with the bachelor's?" And he said, "No, get a PhD." And I
Mm.
said, you got to be, to myself,
Mhm.
I thought, you have to be crazy. I didn't go to high school and you want me to get a PhD.
Mm.
Well, 3 years later, I was in a PhD program at the University of Kansas
Mhm.
and doing very, very well in it. So
Mm.
that message went in and I went for it.
Mm.
And, and I read prodigiously. I read all of Freud and Carl Menninger and, Adler and those early psychoanalysts. And, I analyzed myself and I learned about myself. But really, it wasn't until I recognized my body needed attention. I
Mm.
came across the work of Wilhelm Reich. And, Reich was one of Freud's number one disciples
Mm.
and highly regarded among his colleagues until until he made the statement that the structure of the body was functionally identical to the character structure. And then they thought he was crazy. Okay?
Mm.
That, you know, you had to change, open the body, address the structure, address the tissues. And soon after that, I came across the work of Ida Rolf and Rolfing. And, her approach was you just get your hands in there and you change the body. And,
Mm.
that became a very important part of my journey.
Mm.
And then I came across the work of a woman named Emily Conrad. And
Mhm.
she said, look, the body is approximately 70% water.
Mhm.
And we can learn to move in waves and spirals fluidly.
Yeah.
And that began another 30, 40-year process of studying that work. So it's a process of reclaiming, the way I see it, reclaiming the capacities of my body.
Mm. Beautiful. So we're talking about somatic work, the body and the mind, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I love that. I'm all about that too. Is this what went into your curriculum and teachings for the Continuum teacher? Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, I am a continuum teacher. I teach workshops in that. I have students who take workshops on a regular basis and begin a practice of their own. It's like a meditation focused as deeply as one is capable on the interior of the body,
Okay.
reestablishing its fluid capacity.
Okay, I love that. Let's talk about that. I'm all about somatic work. So, just for a little bit of background, like, yeah, my introduction into psychotherapy was traditional. I went to school, got my master's, learned all the things, and later in my career, I went into coaching. And a lot of coaches do tend to do more body work than mental work. And it's been a beautiful bridge that I have put together where a lot of my healing also includes a lot of somatic work. So I love this conversation. It's so important to have. I think it's depending on where you're at with who you're surrounding yourself with in terms of colleagues and other workers in similar fields. I feel like it's a popular thing for my age group and like coaches in these day and age. Like I feel like everyone is doing body work, and I think that maybe we're having, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, different, I don't want to say struggles, but I know that in my line of work, everyone's doing body work, and I have to remind everyone that the mind is also important. So to do both. And
Great.
yeah, and so maybe in your background or works, it's more the opposite, where it's like everyone wants to do the mental, and no one's bringing in enough of the somatic work. Does that sound about right?
Well, I love hearing, Julissa, what you're saying, because back when I started, in the early 70s, middle 70s, somatic work hardly existed. I don't even know if the term had come into the culture as yet.
Yeah.
And, to hear that it's going in the opposite direction, it's
Which is
really
beautiful.
music to my ears. And yes, yes, it's important to not separate them.
Correct.
So, for example, the work of Ida Rolf deals with the structure of the body. One of her students, named Joseph Heller, he passed just about a month ago, uh, practiced Rolfing for a number of years, then started his own school and made a major yet simple shift in the context of that work. And he said, we're not working on bodies, we're working with people.
Mm,
So, he elicited conversation, he evoked conversation and had a capacity to bring out individuals' limiting beliefs
mhm,
about themselves, about their life,
mhm.
as he was also working with the tissues and structure
Yes,
of the body. So that combination,
is my
is,
favorite.
yeah, it's essential, really is.
Yeah. Okay, beautiful. So tell us more a little bit about, all of your upbringings, your struggles, your understandings, your healing journey, how that led into the work that you do today.
Hmm. Well, my struggles. think I think the biggest struggle that I had, or certainly the most consequential, was my inability to love and who turned me on. In other words, my sexuality and my heart did
Mm,
not live in the same place. And so I went through, relationships and marriages, and it
mm,
was very, very challenging to keep it together.
okay.
And now I'm with the same woman for 40 years. We're in
Beautiful.
our 40th year. And,
Congratulations.
we're both 81 and we're still very much in love and alive. And
Love that.
so
Mm,
it's absolutely possible to make those changes. I was actually, I was destined to die early. Almost did at 59, had a major heart attack.
mm,
They said my heart was damaged, it would never fully recover. It did in 3 months. So the way I look at that is that the heart attack was an inevitable consequence of the first 30 years or so of my life, where my emotions were jagged, my ability to self-regulate was terrible, my ability to self-reflect hardly existed, you name it.
mhm,
And I had those challenges. And the reason that my heart was able to heal and the reason that I didn't die was that trajectory began to change around my 30th birthday. I started to get a much clearer sense of what self care was about.
mm.
Although I had been in therapy for a number of years, it was all mental
Right.
until then. And it
Okay.
was when, I realized diet is important, movement is important, the body structure and tissues are important.
Mm,
And that trajectory allowed me to, first of all, survive a major heart attack, which parenthetically, I didn't know was a heart attack for 3 months because the pain was all in my solar plexus. Not only did I self diagnose, but went to a physician a month later and convinced him by my description that it was in my abdomen. And we spent 2 months in search of the mysterious issue in my abdomen.
mm,
After all our hypotheses were expired,
mm,
that's when he sent me to a cardiologist and discovered that it was serious, very serious.
mm.
And again, the trajectory from age 30 to 59 is what allowed me to survive all that. And the heart muscle healed, which
Okay.
is, could be considered a miracle,
Yeah.
could be considered the result of hard work.
Absolutely. Wow, what a beautiful turnaround. So, can you tell us more about, so just so that our listeners understand, we're suggesting that because of all of our hardships that we endured up until the age of 30, our heart essentially failed, right? Was failing. And after that was a turning point for you, and you took better care of yourself somatically, with movement and diet and medicine. I'm sorry, yes, with movement and nutrition. So, what did that look like for you in that 20, 30-year period where you were able to turn your life around so that our listeners could maybe be inspired and instill some of those things in their own lives?
I think I think the main shift that occurred about that time, my early 30s, was realizing that life could be an adventure regardless of how messed up we are.
Mm,
That, if you could see life that way, then yes, you address the issues, but you're
mhm,
doing it in a different context. So I'm experimenting with what foods work for this body. So
mm,
important.
mm,
Everybody and their brother has opinions about what you're supposed to eat.
mhm, mhm,
There's no shortage of books that tell you Atkins, you know, plant-based, on and on and on. But what I discovered, Julissa, is that you have to find out what works for your body, which is going to be different than from the next person's. Okay.
Okay. I love this conversation. So, how do, because I feel you mentioned earlier having a hard time in relationships. And as you know, but I want to let our listeners know that that is usually caused because we have a disconnect to ourselves and a relationship with things outside of ourselves, like people, like food. If we're disconnected, it's hard to be intuitive. It's hard to eat something and know if it's really good for you or not, or if it serves you well or not. So, how did you, I guess, maybe gain mastery over that? How did you build the skill to know what foods an adventurous movement works for you specifically over anybody else?
Well, in regards to food, Julissa, it's been an ongoing process of experimentation, trial and error,
Mhm,
monitoring the quality of digestion and quality of energy,
mm,
quality of health, vitality, paying attention to all those things, learning, reading, studying, knowing what's out there. Uh, it's hard for people to change the way they eat. There's so many emotional connections to their childhood, to their family. It's how they've done it since they were very little. Uh, I've noticed over many years how difficult that could be for people. I was getting migraine headaches, and I heard a story about another psychologist who was having migraines, and he went to a new physician who told him to get off sugar. The migraines went away that
mm,
very day. Okay, that very day, I stopped the excessive sugar.
mm,
The 3 bottles of Coca Cola, the 2 teaspoons of sugar in my coffee, the donuts, the cakes,
mm,
the syrup over my pancakes. I mean, on and on.
mhm,
The headaches went away. My migraine went away that day.
mm.
Hardly had another one since. And it began a process of a lot of experimentation.
Mm. Okay. So little by little, I loved what you said about what was giving you vitality, energy, and what was good for your digestion. It's like it's back to the basics, but like I said, I think that when we're in a troubling time where there's a large disconnect from self, it's hard to take note of the things that are really aiding or not aiding how you show up in the world with energy and with groundedness and just with a good connection to self. So,
Yeah, I completely agree. And then we have to ask, what does that mean to have a good connection to self?
mhm,
Because what I've concluded is there are a whole number of levels that constitute self. You
Mhm,
know, we can begin with the biological fact that this body, that's an important part of our sense of self, is mostly liquid, water,
mm,
mostly, like more or less 70%.
mhm,
You
mm,
know, then it's the connective tissue system.
mm,
And to give you an illustration of what I mean by that, if you peel an orange, you'll see that under the skin of the orange, there's this layer of white.
mhm,
And if you remove the skin around, let's say, your shoulder, there's a
mhm,
layer of fascia. And that, and if you quarter an orange and look at it, you'll see it goes through that. If you take a piece of orange, look at it in the light, that white fiber is ubiquitous. It's everywhere through the orange. Same thing with the body. To connect to oneself at that level, to connect with oneself at the level of how we move, how we stand, you know, how we express ourselves in the world, to
mhm.
connect with ourselves at the level of what we deeply believe to be true about ourselves,
Right.
about other, about life. And you know what many people don't realize, Julissa, is those highly influential beliefs are
Mhm,
formulated by the time we're 3 or 4 years old. By
mhm.
that time, we know, like you said, your children know it's safe to express themselves,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm,
I'd say the majority of adults did not have that experience,
mhm.
right? And so their beliefs about what's allowed and what's not allowed are very different and formulated by the time they're 3 or 4 years old.
Right.
You know, is the world safe? Can I express my needs? Will my needs be met, you know, in a timely manner? Will they be met in a consistent manner or not? With all of those.
Right. Yeah, this is it's a huge I love this conversation because it's such a huge part of what I do. So in my business I have two main legs, and one of them is for mothers. I help them in the beginning of their motherhood journey, some a little bit beyond, but mostly in the beginning. And I also help entrepreneurs with their businesses. And I mention that because a lot of the work that I do is going back to the child, going back to what you thought was feasible, possible, what your limitations you were taught to have at a young age, and how that still bleeds through to the person that you are today,
Absolutely.
especially in parenting. I work with moms, but this, of course, goes for fathers too. The way that we were raised is the way that we will unconsciously raise our children as well. And when I think about my son who's 3 and he's a boy and he's just loving exploring and adventuring, and he's learning what his body can do at this times in terms of flexibility, climbing, just do having fun, right? And that's
Hmm.
being paired with what we're teaching him, what he's learning about himself. And so when he stretches to go climb a tree or a jungle gym, and we're behind him saying, you can do this, this is scary, but you got it, or whatever the case may be, that mind body connection, that tissue, those memory cells are being formed. And
Hmm.
that will carry on with him. And so if we can imagine it for, my son or children that are young now, the same things were happening to us when we were learning to either move our bodies with freedom or being constricted in doing so, paired with whatever beliefs, cultural, societal views that were also introduced to us at that time, and how that really is a large piece of who you are as an adult. I think
Mm.
it's so fascinating and beautiful, intricate, and just interesting because for me, being a parent has been one of the biggest blessings because I'm I'm observing my children and loving on them. And I'm also connecting the points back to me and of like, okay, well, what did this look like for me growing up and having a greater understanding of why I am the way I am for certain parts of my life.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And you said we parent the way we were parented. And to a degree that's true, but the more personal work we do, the
Sure.
more we realize we have choices. We
Mhm.
don't, a friend of mine, a young friend, is in his late 30s, early 40s with a 2-year old, and he was parented, with the spare the rod, spoil the child.
Mhm.
And he came to me and said, what should I do? Is there a book to read? So I recommended a good book, The Connected Child. And, he's working to not do to his son what was done to him.
For sure.
And that's what's important. Otherwise, we just repeat what we learned, how we were molded. Mhm. I think it's important too to mention. I'm reading a book by the comedian Bill Maher. I don't
Okay.
know if you know him, but he laments how college kids these days feel entitled and need more discipline. And I think he has a point in that in addition to the freedom, structure is needed.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Parents are parents. They're not a 3-year-old's playmate and best friend. They are the authorities. They're setting the guidelines, and I think it's important to keep that dimension conscious as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wrote it down, The Connected Child. I'm going to add it to my reading list. But yes, I agree with what you stated. I think so. For clarity, what I meant to say was parents will unconsciously parent the same ways, but yes, the more inner work that you've done, the more conscious you can become to then change as you see fit.
Yeah, absolutely. Hmm.
Yeah. So we're getting towards the end of our episode, and I always hold space for a special moment of connection and vulnerability at the end of our episodes. And so, my question to you, Don, is you're such a thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You have so much wisdom, and I loved being able to ask you questions and learn more about your upbringing and what has made you the person that you are today, and how much love you have for the body, somatic work, which has been overlooked for many, many years, connecting the mind and the body, correct? So, in this day and age, I find that I look up to you as someone who has mastery over this field simply because of the years that you've had in it and all that you've done with it. And
Thank
so,
you.
yeah, absolutely. I think that people look to this podcast, it's Mindset Mastery with Julissa Edwards, and how do people master what they've done in their life? And is of course there's always room for growth, but I think that sometimes when people think that we have mastered something, it means that like there's no more work, and that couldn't be further from the truth, right?
Correct.
And so, what's something that maybe, and it could be in the field of psychology, which I think is everything, but I'm biased, um, but what's something in life that maybe you're having a hard time with right now, and that you're proudly being the student of in this portion of your life?
Mm. Well, remember, I'm 81 years old,
Mhm.
and I've had a number of good friends, actually three in the last 4 weeks, who suffered a tragedy.
Mm,
One of them, for example, lost his 41-year-old daughter who went into surgery. Uh, Another lost both his parents in a freak car crash. Plus, a good friend of mine who was a few years older, I mentioned him earlier, passed a month ago. So facing my mortality has been in my face.
mm,
And, to recognize the preciousness and sacredness of each moment of our lives,
mm.
to really recognize the importance of not losing touch with old friends and staying in touch with, current friends, I think is my answer to your question.
Thank you for your honesty. That is a different level of insight. I would imagine, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that at this day and age, you are running into more of those, um, what would I call it? Instances where it's a lot of life and death.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
Yeah. Do you feel what do you think makes it most scary? The thought that, maybe we're closer to the end of our timeline here. And that sounds so dark. I don't mean it to sound that way. But what do you think is the most scariest thing? Is it that you don't feel that you have fulfilled all that you want? That you just want to enjoy being a human as long as possible, your loved ones? What's most pulling for you?
It's a good, challenging question, Julissa. I think it's not letting the people I love feel that love.
Mm,
You know, I
yeah.
just got an email just before we began this morning, uh, from a dear old friend that I don't see much anymore, but we were close 30 years ago. And she asked for prayers because she's going in for a very serious surgery.
Mm,
Again, a life and death situation. And, I want to send her a message as soon as I can. That sort of thing.
mm. You know what just came to mind for me? It's a little off, but I promise it'll go back to where what we're speaking about. Um, and this is a pause. My editor can take this out, but I have you for a good 5 more minutes. Is that okay? I want to be mindful of your time.
Yes.
Okay. Um, yeah, so trees are known to we just moved to Charleston, South Carolina, my family and I, and they have these
Mm,
beautiful oak trees here that are just so massive and they're just beautiful to look at. And learning a little bit more about trees, I've recently found out that trees connect to all other trees. And
yes.
yeah, it's beautiful. And their roots are connected. And even they have like mother and daughter trees. And if the young ones are in need of nurturance, water, whatever is needed, they can filtrate those nutrients to the other trees, which I think
Yes.
is really, really beautiful. So someone as yourself who's in their 80s and has just a lot of love and wisdom to share and give, and what you're telling me is that that's what you think you'll miss most, of the fear of not being able to give your love to others. I'm seeing you as a big oak tree with so much to give to others, and maybe your fear that that has an expiration date. um, but not I am in no place to share from experience because I'm obviously not at that stage of my life.
Mm,
But I would imagine that your love will continue to be felt with the potency of your connections that you have on your time here on earth.
yes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Don. Do you have any last words of wisdoms or anything that you'd like to share for the listeners tuning into this episode?
Two things. One is if you haven't already, embark on the journey. Embark on this. It's an adventure of a lifetime, which is the subtitle of my book, Healing the Wounds of Childhood and Culture, an adventure of a lifetime.
Mm.
And my website uh, isn't designed to procure business because I'm semi-retired. So it's designed to provide resources for people, books, disciplines, practices.
Mm.
So check it out. It's www.pathsofconnection.com.
Okay. And all of that will also be in the show notes if you desire to look at Don's past works and view his resources. Don, thank you so, so much. It was a pleasure speaking and getting to know
No,
you.
it's delightful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Already. So we'll say bye for now. Thank you for tuning into Mindset Mastery with Julissa Edwards. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast to receive future episodes packed with valuable insights. Remember to follow us on social media at thehealthy.highperformer for more inspiration, tips, and updates. If you found this episode helpful, we'd appreciate it if you could share it with your network and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us as we continue to empower high performers like you. Until next time, keep mastering your mindset and thriving as a healthy high performer.